Welcome back. Today we are going to do a study from this beautiful subway etching by the great American artist John Sloan. And we're going to begin, as we normally do, with the head. So we're just going to sort of block in a little volume for the head. Zoom out here. And we're going to try to we're thinking about where the torso is in relation to the head. So we're going to, here's sort of the mass of the head. Here's the mass of the rib cage. We'll be back here. Sorry, I'm drawing with my mouse again. And the mass of the pelvis, like that. So the main thing you got to see is that the head is out in front of the rib cage. That's because she's basically hunched. Do you see that? So we want to get, here's the head. There's the rib cage sort of behind the head. You can picture the spine curving around. And here's the pelvis is slightly out in front of the rib cage because the gesture here is this curve. Sorry, I just lost focus for a second. Hang on. Okay. Now we're going to continue the gesture with the thigh. This leg comes up slightly from the pelvis. It's the knees sort of level with the top of the pelvis and not too far to the left of it because this leg is somewhat foreshortened. And then here's the angle of this leg. It's a really good hack to look for similar angles in a pose like this. So we got this angle is mirrored by this angle here. See, here's the arm, here's the leg. I gotta move the leg maybe a little bit over to the right. The other leg is a little bit steeper than the first one. And that's sort of the extent of my gesture. My next step, and I recommend this for everybody at all times, we're usually looking at this point in the drawing, we're looking to see how the person's carrying their weight, how the weight is connecting to the ground. Obviously, her weight is not connecting to the ground through her feet, it's more through her pelvis, right? Because she's on a chair. So it's a really good idea to draw the support. So we've got, this is sloping downhill only about 5 or 10 degrees. You see that? So make sure you get this angle right. It's not very steep. This is sloping downhill a little more steeply because we're dealing with a perspective situation here. And by the time we get down here, it's a little steeper still. And if you remember anything about perspective, you'll remember that where these converge should represent our eye level. So you can tell that the eye level of the artist was actually higher than her eye level. Can you see that? So we want to account for that with these orthogonals. So this one passes a little less steep right through but still tilting right under the head. And you'll notice a subtle thing here, which is that this orthogonal, these here are more horizontal. So this is not really a one-point perspective study. This is an optical perspective where the orthogonals kind of level out as they get towards the edges of the frame. If you didn't understand that, don't stress about it, but it's worth knowing about. Okay, so I'm going to do a little more with this structure here. This is sort of where the wall is. Here's the sign. This is going to a vanishing point on the other direction, so it's virtually horizontal, but it's tilting up just a little. And that's sort of a suggestion of our figure with the gesture and the environment. Okay. This is a very form-fitting hat, so it's gonna, the hat itself gives us a lot of ideas about the structure of her head. So we're gonna start by drawing the hat. This is a particular challenge because the face is partly obscured by the book, and that's going to make it a little harder to draw than usual. It's easier to draw the face if you can see the whole thing. And if you can't see the whole thing, it's a good idea to, when you're laying things in, to sort of pretend that you can see it so that you can rely on your intuitive knowledge of heads. You don't see a lot of hats like this anymore. These look like ostrich feathers. Let's get in a little closer here. It would be a mistake to think that the shading here is not important, because the shading tells us where the light's coming from. It also gives our brains some clues as to what the form of the head is doing. So we're going to go ahead and do a close copy of the shading on this hat, by which I mean we're going to try to copy his shading direction precisely. It's a beautiful little hatching study. Sloan really loved cross-hatching. That's why he was attracted to etching as a medium. And he did a lot of nudes later in life, where he leans on an increasingly kind of abstracted hatching style. So he was obviously into it. Okay, so we're going to take a measurement to help you avoid the number one mistake that you guys always make, which is putting the bridge of the nose too close to the middle. So we're going to take a measurement here and compare it to here. And notice that this is about a quarter as wide as this is. Maybe a little over a quarter. But it's definitely not a third. Maybe like 2/5. So if we carry this line down, just inside this line, there's the brow ridge. there's the construction line I just put in. That's not the slant of the eyes. That's just a measuring line. And if we go about 1/5 of the way over this overall distance, that's about where the bridge of the nose is. The slant of the eyes is, it's another orthogonal. Notice that it's about the same as the slant of the back of the seat. You see that? It might be just a little steeper because maybe your head is tilted just a little. So that's sort of the slant that the eyes go on. Here's the eyebrow. Here's that bridge of the nose that we carefully measured. Here's the first eye. And I'm going to do one more measurement. So we've got this distance. We've got the hair coming down halfway. So the hair comes down about at the halfway point. And then the eye is closer to the hairline than it is to the nose line. So it's about here. And she's got this little fringe of hair coming down from under the hat. And the nose. Oh, I just made it too short and too wide. Hang on a second. So this is something to look out for. You just saw me make this mistake. When the head is tipped down, like this, this distance grows between the nose and the eyes. When it's tipped up, this distance shortens between the nose and the eyes. So what I just missed was that this distance between the eye and the ala is a little extra long because the head is tipped down. So that's a little better, I think. Here's the cheekbone. And again, we're at a disadvantage here because we can't see the rest of the face, but I'm gonna very lightly just indicate what the rest of the face might have looked like, just so I can get a sense of the volume of the head. As I was explaining earlier, this is an etching. He drew that nose with 2 lines, and they had to be done at one shot, and he couldn't erase, he couldn't go back and fix them, and they're perfect, which is why I so admire this guy. It's not easy to pull something like that off. So here's this page of the book. It comes right, almost touches her nose. So this book is basically, to us, a very unfamiliar volume. The way the the way it's splayed out like that, this is not something we draw every day. And so it would be a mistake to rely on our knowledge of the form. It would be a better idea in this case to sort of abstract it and draw just a shape. See the shape I outlined in red? So we're just looking at angles and distances. This angle is about 10 degrees downhill going to the left. These lines at the perimeter they're orthogonals, but in this drawing they're virtually parallel. We can call it parallel. This is a little less steep than this one. And I think I brought it out a little too far. I'm going to shorten this. And what I'm doing, and what you should be doing now, is just looking back and forth between the shape you drew and the shape on the original and making sure the shapes are similar. Then I'm going to do some of the interior lines like this. And I'm going to indicate the spine of the book, which is another orthogonal like that. And that's sort of our book. I still made this side a little too big though, so forgive me. I'm going to make one more correction. When I assess that, I'm looking at the size of the book compared to the size of the head. Okay. This is her shoulder connecting from the cheek down to the page of the book. She's got this giant collar thing that goes from the book corner up and around behind the head. This hand, what a struggle to draw this hand in an etching plate. But you see how he's very deftly, he's showing that gesture of like these three fingers are supporting the weight of one side, and then this index finger is coming around the other side of the spine, and you can feel the thumb wrapping around. Like, it's not the most elegant hand that he ever drew, but you can see that it really shows how she's holding the weight of the book. So it does its job in the narrative, even though it's not a beautiful hand, but it's a very effective hand. When you're dealing with a heavily clothed figure like this, it's a good idea to sort of imagine where the joints are. And I would say her arm is doing something like this. It's hard to see, but this angle's important. See the angle of the lower arm. And then she's got this huge coat. So we're going to go, this goes way out past where we blocked in her rib cage. And we're drawing this donut-like form that hooks up and over her wrist, comes down. A big theme in my teaching lately has been simplification, and if you think about it, when people say like, oh, how do you draw cloth? How do you draw leaves? How do you draw skin? Like, what they mean is, what are some simplifications that I can use to make this go faster and more easily? If you want to just copy a photograph exactly with every detail, you don't really need to learn how to do it, because you're just copying everything. This is where technique begins, is like in capturing things like this with just a few lines. I'm going to do some shading, and I'm not going to talk about it too much. That's not going to be a big part of the rubric, so if you're having a hard time just getting things in the right place, just focus on that. That's more important. But this is really beautiful cross-hatching. It really, somehow with these, understand with the etching lines, you can't control line thickness. It's not like drawing with a pen where a lighter touch yields a lighter line and a heavier touch yields a heavier line. He's only got one line weight. If he wants it to be dark, he just goes over the line a bunch of times. And yet he somehow not only conveys the volumes of these forms, which he does with hatching direction, but he also conveys something of their texture. I don't know how, but it's just the way he's in control of like where the darks and the lights are, really gives us an idea of the texture of these forms, I think. Okay, so the sleeve is this big form here. The body of the coat, it's hanging way down past her pelvis. This might be a useful thing to sort of block in again, so we can look at this overall shape, which includes the sort of hem of her coat. So we're coming out here like this, down and out. And here's her little handbag, which looks tiny next to all this big billowing cloud-like coat forms. Okay, so let's think about where this hand goes. We're going to use a little bit of crating technique. See, we're going to go from the corner of the book this way a little to get to the outside of the wrist. And the fingers are right under the knuckles of this hand. And the level of the knee is just a little higher than the top of the handbag. So it's this hand has to fit somewhere in this space. The body of the hand is very foreshortened, so that's the whole body of the hand. Then he's got the knuckles coming over, overlapping the body of the hand. And now he's got the fingers. So here's the little finger in front. And then he's got 3 more fingers are visible. The last one is barely visible, like that. Little shading on the body of the hand. And that's disappearing into this second large cuff. And here's where this arm is sloping down and then around the cuff like this. So anybody could have taken a photo of this woman and done a fine drawing of her. A drawing like this, though, it contains his ideas about what he saw. And I think that's because it's largely from memory. And I think seeing her sitting there, he was probably struck just by the kind of billowing volumes of the coat, like all this excess sagging fabric everywhere, and the beautiful contrast between that and her legs, which are bare and kind of taut. Like this, the skin is, she has a like tight skin over her kneecap. So we're just transitioning here from all this extra material to the spareness of her legs. I'm sure this is something he saw and he made a mental note, maybe a quick sketch. But the advantage of working from memory is that it's possible to convey not just what you saw, but how you reacted to it, like what you thought about it, the impression that it made on you. And that's what photorealism completely lacks, is any capacity for that personal impression. And I know I'm going on and on about this like a propagandist, but the difference between art and photography is that the artist can tell us something about the way he or she sees the world by the way the art is created. Photographer also says something about the way they see the world, but only by their choice of subject. So I should be talking a little more about what I'm drawing here, but this form of the leg is pretty straightforward. There is a plane change here along the edge of the tibia and a form shadow here on the muscle of the lower leg, the calf muscles. Sloan is not about showing off how much anatomy he knew. He's just like, he just knows enough to tell the story and get the job done. And also enough to do some expressive distortions of the forms. Okay, so notice there's this very slight hump right here where the foot starts. And I think he's slightly exaggerating. This is another thing you would have noticed is the way these tight-fitting pumps, it feels like the foot's kind of squeezed into it. You see this little significant plane change right here? Sloan, in my view, is one of the last sort of master draftsmen of American art. And for that, he was particularly hated by the abstract expressionists. He was considered someone who kind of shamelessly pandered to popular taste, and his works, as the result of their disparagement and the disparagement of some of the critics of the time, he was not considered a very important painter for quite a while. I think he might be experiencing a little bit of a revival. Not someone that I learned about in my 20th century American art history course at Wesleyan. Here we're just sort of, we drew the tibia and we're just massing the volumes that we see around it. And in the same way that we tried to relate the forms of the hands to each other, we can sort of relate the forms of the feet to each other by looking for these angles. And we could even sort of block in this negative space between the legs. And make sure we're sort of on the right track with this relationship. Getting the feet in the right relationship to each other is always a critical task because it speaks to our eye level. And don't put too much shoe here. This side of the shoe is almost completely foreshortened. Look at the lovely little cast shadow of the one leg overlapping the other one, and very simple form shadow shading. And I think a slight exaggeration of just how wide the her calves are in comparison to her very delicate little ankles. So as I was starting to say, photographers express themselves by the things that they choose to take pictures of and the way those things are cropped. So they can express themselves through two-dimensional design, and they can express themselves through through selection, choosing to emphasize some things and not others. What they can't do is expressively distort the forms that they see. And what I want you to understand is that photorealism can be good, but it can only be good in the same way that photography is good. You know, the photorealist, like our friend Dylan, chooses what to take pictures of, and he crops those pictures in ways that are more or less successful designs, and ends up with a photograph that he considers to be worth drawing. The fact that he draws it, however, adds nothing to our understanding of Dylan. Like, if we want to know how Dylan sees the world, we just have to look at his photographs. We don't really need to see the drawings. What the drawings tell us is that Dylan is an unusually patient and detail-oriented human being, but they don't tell us anything about how he sees the world. The photograph is sort of the beginning and the end of his capacity for self-expression. A drawing like this, however, that doesn't rely on photography tells us so much about Sloan's, not only the way he sees the world, but the way, really about his time. It's sort of like it really transports us back to this time period in a way that photographs can't even do, because we're not only seeing a scene typical of this time period, but we're seeing what sort of impression that scene made on somebody who lived in that time period. Okay, so I've blocked everything in. I'm looking for where the darks are at this point. And I'm trying to get just a little bit of the contrast. You can see that the darker darks and the lighter lights in the handbag give us a sense that this is perhaps like a patent leather or a little bit of a shiny leather. as contrasted with the coat, which has slightly less dark darks and slightly less bright highlights. But we're not going to do a close copy of all this stuff because that would frankly take more time than we have today. But we can just the exercise of trying to shade, try to make our hands move the way Sloan's hands moved, is going to improve our ability to shade a lot. This should all become instinctive after a while, and eventually you'll find your own language of shading, but the quickest way to get there is just do a lot of copies of people whose technique you admire. Sloan's etching technique is, Sloan did do some copperplate engraving, and his etching technique is a little bit like engraver's technique in that there's no strong sense of his hand's relation to the plate. He may even have rotated the plate somewhat as he worked, the way an engraver would have. I can't say for sure, but it's interesting to think about that possibility. But don't make any more corrections in your drawing. Just try to do some of this shading. This is what I call orthogonal shading. Notice that the main shading direction here is towards the vanishing point. And then notice how he shows the way the seat cushion is sort of indented here by turning these lines into curved lines. And cross-hatching is another way that drawing can sort of surpass photorealism in a way, because all these hatching marks not only show the values, they show Sloan's understanding of the form. And it's important to remember that cameras, at least not yet, don't understand forms. They just understand values. Well, I don't know if they understand anything, but they're capable of representing values. And so they are not capable of understanding form. And when you work from a photograph, you're less apt to try to emphasize the form than you are when you work from life. And part of that is because when you work from a photograph, you're not you're not seeing the reference in 3 dimensions, because you're not seeing a stereo image. That's kind of mind-blowing to think about, but like, if you've ever seen a 3D movie or a 3D photograph, and it's just so amazing how solid everything looks, right? It's like a shocking difference in solidity. And it's important to remember that anytime you do art from a photograph, your reference lacks that same solidity that it would have if you were drawing from life. Like the simplest little still life that you set up in front of your eyes has the same amazing 3-dimensional effect as a 3D movie, but we just don't think about it. We just take it for granted because it's always there. But so when you draw from life, you are going to instinctively bring out some of the 3-dimensional effects that you might overlook if you were drawing from a flat 2-dimensional reference like a photograph. The last detail that I really should have talked about is this lovely cast shadow. Remember, in a subway car, the light's coming from all over the place, so we're not seeing very clear and distinct cast shadows, but we do see this kind of pool of darkness under her legs, which is again represented with, this is all orthogonal shading. You see that? Our hatching lines are going up and to the right to one vanishing point and up and to the left to the other vanishing point. Orthogonal shading is not something that hardly anybody ever thinks of doing all on their own. It's something you learn studying other artists who have done it. I hardly ever see anyone just spontaneously start shading their orthogonals, least of all someone who hasn't studied perspective a great deal, but definitely worth understanding. Okay, thanks as always for watching. That does it for today, and we'll see you next time.